Good. So first let me list down what is our agenda, what we are going to learn as part of this microservices. First we need to understand what is monolith architecture. Then we need to learn challenges with monolith architecture. So we know developing all the functionalities in the single project is called as monolith architecture. But what are the challenges involved in the monolith architecture? The next one, we need to understand microservices introduction. Why this microservices came into picture and what is microservices architecture? How we are going to develop a project using microservices architecture? What are the pros and cons with the microservices? That means what are the advantages of going with what are the advantages with microservices? What are the disadvantages with microservices? We need to understand. After that part, the next important is we need to learn about a concept called service registry. Here I am going to explain Eureka server. Eureka server we are going to use as a service registry. After that Eureka, we need to talk about admin server. We need to talk about admin server. So admin server is used to monitor our application. Then I am going to talk about Jipkin server, Eureka server, admin server and Jipkin server. Once it is completed, now we are going to learn inter-service communication. Already we understood external service communication, how one REST API will communicate with another REST API by using REST template and web client. That part already we discussed in the REST API. Here we need to understand inter-service communication. Inter-service communication, nothing but how one REST API can communicate with another REST API within the same project. For this inter-service communication, I'm going to discuss a concept called PN client. I'm going to explain a concept called PN client. After this, we are going to understand load balancing by using ribbon. We will understand load balancing by using ribbon. Then next one, we need to talk about API gateway. We need to talk about API gateway. This is the question they asked in the interview paper. What is API gateway in the microservices? In this API gateway, earlier people used to work with Joule, but nowadays Joule is outdated. That is deprecated in the Spring Cloud. Instead of Joule, we are going to learn the latest concept, that is Spring Cloud Gateway. Spring Cloud Gateway is available. That is replacement for API gateway. After completion of this API gateway, we need to talk about circuit breaker. Circuit breaker that is used to develop resilience systems. By using circuit breaker, we are going to develop resilience APIs. Then after, we need to talk about Spring Boot with a Redis cache. How to integrate our Spring Boot application with the Redis. And we need to talk about Spring Boot with Apache Kafka. How our application will be integrated with Apache Kafka. Then after, we need to talk about Spring Boot with reactive programming. What is reactive programming in the Spring Boot? That is a new topic from 5.x onwards. Then we need to talk about config server. What is config server in the microservices? What is the purpose of config server? Fine. See here, monolith architecture, challenges with monolith architecture, microservices introduction, microservices architecture. What are the pros and cons with microservices? And we need to talk about service registry, which is Eureka server we are going to use. Then we need to talk about admin server. Then we need to talk about Jipkin server. Then inter-service communication by using PN client. And we need to talk about load balancing by using ribbon. After that, API gateway by using Spring Cloud Gateway concept. Then circuit breaker, for that we are going to implement resilience. Spring Boot with Redis Cache, Spring Boot with Apache Kafka, Spring Boot with reactive programming, and Spring Cloud Config Server. We need to talk about Spring Cloud Config Server. Fine. And one more topic we need to learn, how to connect with multiple databases. I have one REST API. We already know data JPA. By using data JPA, we are connecting with the database. But in the real time, one REST API should communicate with the multiple databases also, depends on the requirement. I'm not saying that every REST API will connect with multiple databases. Some REST API may connect with only one database. Some REST API may connect with the two different databases. How can we configure multi-DB connections in the Spring Boot? Once this part is completed with microservices, another most important area, how to secure our microservice based application, how to secure our REST API. In this security, we need to learn what is basic authentication, and what is JDBC authentication, and what is user detail service in the REST API, in the Spring Boot, user detail service, and we need to talk about OAuth security, and we need to talk about JWT. What is JWT? JSON Web Tokens. JWT is one of the most famous security technique in the market nowadays. So most of the REST APIs are using this JWT token nowadays in the market. Some projects are using OAuth, some projects are using JWT, some projects are using both. Okay, so these concepts are related to Spring security, guys. These concepts are related to microservices. These concepts are related to microservices, and the below concepts are related to security. Microservices and security. Just look at this. We have to learn these concepts. Microservices, it is going to take 2 to 3 weeks of time. Security will take 1 week of time. Monolith architecture, challenges with monolith architecture, microservices introduction, microservices architecture, pros and cons with microservices, service registry, that is Eureka server, admin server, Jipkin server, inter-service communication, PN client, load balancing, API gateway, circuit breaker, boot with Redis, boot with Kafka, boot with React, reactive programming, Spring Cloud Config Server, how to connect with multiple databases. Coming to security part, how to secure our REST API, what is basic authentication in the security, how to implement JDBC authentication with respect to Spring security, what is user detail service in the Spring security, how to secure our applications by using OAuth, how to secure our applications by using JWT. With these concepts, our Spring Boot microservices course will be completed. Okay, fine guys, good. Let's get started. Fine. So first let's understand what is monolith architecture. Already we discussed it. What is monolith architecture? Can anyone tell me what is monolith architecture? Developing single application contains all functionalities. One single application contains all functionalities. That application is called as monolith based application. Now, for example, if I go for one project called makemytrip.com, in the makemytrip.com, there are several functionalities are available. Like, what happened? Yeah, so we are having Make My Trip application. In the Make My Trip application, flights booking is available, hotels booking is available, homestays, holidays, trains, buses, cabs, charter flights. Like that, there are several functionalities are available in the single project. Okay, but we don't know what is the architecture they are following. Let's assume that I want to book flight tickets in my project. I want to provide that functionality. I want to provide hotel booking, trains booking, buses booking, cabs booking. So if one project contains all the functionalities, then that project is called as monolith application. Now here, if you go for monolith based application, there are some challenges available. What are the challenges? First challenge is single point of failure. What is the meaning of single point of failure? If a small problem occurred in the project, then whole application will be down. Customers cannot access our application. So single application contains all the functionalities, that is called monolith architecture. In the monolith architecture, single point of failure is available. If there is a small problem in the project, then the complete application will be down. Complete application will be down. So now here, another problem is redeployment. Another problem is redeployment. If I make a small change in the code, then I need to redeploy entire application. I made a small change for hotel booking functionality. Because of that change, I need to redeploy my entire application. And another problem, that is maintenance. Every time redeploying the entire application, every time recompiling the entire project, when there is a small change, it is going to impact somewhere else in the project. If I make some code changes, that may impact somewhere else in the project. So that's why monolith architecture having some challenges, disadvantages with monolith. Can you guys tell me what is monolith? Come on, fast. The application which contains all the functionalities. Single application which contains all the functionalities is called as monolith architecture. What are the problems with the monolith architecture? Single point of failure is available. Redeployment is the problem. Maintenance is the problem. And stick to single technology. Stick to single programming language. Single technology. Suppose I am developing my project by using Java. The entire project should be developed by using only Java language. Can I develop a project with a combination of Java and .NET, Java and Python? Here it is not possible because we are developing one single application, one programming language we have to use till entire project got completed. To overcome challenges with the monolith architecture, companies are preferring which architecture, guys? Companies are preferring microservices architecture. What is a microservice? First, remember, microservices is not a programming language. We are having Java programming language, Python programming language, C# programming language. But microservices is not a programming language. Microservices is not a framework. Hibernate is a framework. Spring is a framework. Spring Boot is a framework. Can I call microservices is a framework? No, microservices is not a framework. Then what is microservices? Microservices is an architectural design pattern. What is microservices? Microservices is a architectural design pattern. We are having some problems with the monolith architecture. To overcome the problems of the monolith architecture, we are going for microservices. Microservices is not a programming language. Microservices is not a framework. Microservices is an architectural design pattern. Microservices architecture based project means collection of REST APIs will be available. So let us see here. We can develop one project like this. In my project here, UI will be available. In my project, UI will be available. And in my project, backend will be available. I mean to say, some controllers will be available and some services will be available. And I have DAO also. And here, database will be available. One project contains everything. Controllers available, UI available, services available, DAO available, and it is going to communicate with the database. It is going to communicate with the database. This application is called monolith application. One project contains everything. One project which contains everything, that is called monolith based application. If you go for other side, whatever the functionality that you have, for example, hotels available, hotels booking, I will develop as one separate project. That is one microservice, one REST API. Whatever the logic that is required to book the hotel ticket, I will develop that as hotels API. That is only REST API, which will contain the logic to book only hotel ticket. Hotel booking related functionality will be available in the hotels API. And similarly, trains booking is available, flights booking is available. For flights booking, whatever the logic is required, I will write that in flights API. I will write that logic in the flights API. These are called REST APIs. Every REST API is called one microservice. Every REST API is called as one microservice. They are providers. They are providers. Hotels API available, flights API available. Similarly, I will go for trains API. Like this, in one project, multiple REST APIs will be available. These REST APIs contains only backend business logic. These REST APIs contains only backend business logic. For hotels API, 1 DB will be available. For flights API, 1 DB will be available. For trains API, 1 DB will be available. Now, every API will maintain its own database. This is a concept called DB per service. What is this concept, guys? DB per service. So this is one design pattern in the market, DB per service, database per service. What is the meaning of that? Database per service, nothing but every microservice will maintain its own database. Every microservice will maintain its own database. If we go to 3 to 5 years experience level, then we are going to implement these microservices by using a concept called CQRS pattern. Command query pattern will be available. That is the advanced level concept. CQRS pattern will be available. For every microservice, in every microservice, I don't want to write the DAO layer. All the DAOs I will write in one API. Every microservice, if they want to communicate with the database, they need to communicate with another microservice. One microservice will contain only database logic. That is called CQRS pattern. That is very advanced concept, right? So first, if we understand what is microservice architecture, then I can tell you advanced concept in the microservice. Fine. Now see here, hotels API is available. Hotels API will maintain its own database. Flights API available, it will maintain its own database. Trains API available, it will maintain its own database, right? Now, every microservice is responsible for only one functionality, single responsibility. Instead of developing everything in one project, I'm going to create small APIs. Every API will contain only one functionality. I will create one project, Spring Boot application. In that Spring Boot application, I will develop only hotel booking functionality. That is one project. I will run that project in one server. That is called one REST API. We can call it as one microservice. And similarly, Flights API is available. I will create another Spring Boot project. In that project, I will develop only flights booking logic. That is a separate project. I will run that in a separate server. Two APIs available. They are called two microservices. And I will create another Spring Boot project. In that project, I will develop the logic for only train ticket booking that I will run in a separate server. Like that, in one project, multiple REST APIs will be available. What is REST API? Which contains only B2B communication, no front end. You give the request with the JSON data, it will give the response with the JSON data. That's it. No UI, no JSP, no time lift, nothing. REST API, nothing but only B2B communication will happen. Now, for all these backend APIs, business logic will be available in the APIs. Every API is a separate project. Every API is a separate project, and these APIs will run in a separate server. These APIs will run in a separate server. Tomorrow, if I get some problem in the hotels API, do you think that my whole project will be down? Only hotels booking will not work. Still customers can access trains booking, flights booking, cabs booking. That is the one of the major advantage with the microservices. Always our application will have high availability. 24/7 my application will be up and running. If some API having some problem, no issue. The remaining APIs are working. Still customers can access our project. For all these APIs, UI will be developed in a separate project. For all these APIs, UI will be available in a separate project. User interface will be available. UI will be available in the separate project. That UI application will communicate with these backend APIs. When the end user accessing Make My Trip application, makemytrip.com. When you go for makemytrip.com, we are accessing only UI application. We are accessing only UI application. In this UI, when I do some operation, I will do some searches. I will do some search here. Select Delhi, Bangalore. Date I am going to select something and I will click on search button. Then from the UI, request will go to backend hotels API and it is going to get those detailed flights. Basically, I'm using flights. So when I click on that button, from the UI, request will go to flights API. It will talk to flights DB. It will get the data, give to the UI in the form of JSON. UI will render that data in the user interface. Like this, in the real time, projects are developing by using microservices architecture. What is microservice? Microservices is not a programming language. Microservices is not a framework. Microservices is an architectural design pattern. Any programming language can use this architecture to develop that project. Java people can use microservice architecture. Python people also can use microservice architecture, right? .NET people also can use microservices architecture to develop that project. Tell me, what is monolith architecture and what is microservice architecture? Come on, guys. Come on, what is the difference between monolith architecture versus microservice? What is the difference between monolith and microservice? Monolith means one application. Here, let me take this. One project which contains everything. One project which contains everything, that is called as monolith architecture. UI, business logic, data access logic, everything is available. Everything is available in the single project. If everything is available in the single project, then that is called monolith architecture. What are the problems with the monolith architecture? Come on, guys. What is the problem with the monolith architecture? Single point of failure. That means if there is a problem, the whole application will be down. Maintenance problem. Complete code will be available at one place. Complete code will be available at one place. If I make some changes in my code, that may affect in the other place. If I make some changes in the code, that may affect in the other place. And if I make some code changes, entire project should be compiled. Entire project should be redeployed. Entire project should be redeployed. And one more thing is performance issue. Okay, the complete application available in one server, so many requests are coming to that server, burden will increase on the server. Lot of requests will be coming to our application. One server should process all the requests, burden will be increased on the server. So to avoid that monolith architecture problems, companies are preferring microservices architecture. So our course name, Spring Boot Microservices. That means we need to develop our application using microservices architecture with the help of Spring Boot. Spring Boot is a framework to develop the application. How to develop application? You have two options. One is monolith architecture. Another one is microservices architecture. Monolith is outdated architecture. Microservices, the most trending approach in the market. Microservices architecture, the most trending approach in the market. Not only for Java, remember that architecture use a universal architecture. .NET people also following microservices architecture. Python people also following microservice architecture. PHP people also can follow microservices architecture. It is architectural design pattern to develop our application with loosely coupling. Okay, here one microservice is available. It will contain the logic for flights booking. This microservice contains the logic for hotels booking. This microservice contains the logic for trains booking, cabs booking, admin functionality, user management functionality. Like that, we can create multiple microservices. Every microservice is independent REST API. Every microservice is a independent REST API that will be executed in a separate server. Now, if I go for monolith architecture, complete project will run in one server. The whole application will be packaged as one jar file or one war file that will deployed in one server. Every request will go to that server that is responsible to handle all the requests. But what about microservices? One project available or couple of projects available. Assume that there are 6 microservices are available. 6 microservices nothing but 6 projects available. 6 microservices nothing but 6 projects are available. Microservice nothing but one REST API. One REST controller will be available. One REST API will run in one server. 6 REST APIs available. They are running in the 6 servers. In my project, 150 REST APIs available. Our project is credit card management. As I told you, in my company, I am responsible for credit card management. Citizens will apply for the credit card. Our system will decide that citizen is eligible for our card or not. If he is eligible, our system will send the credit card bill generation, credit card interest calculation, credit card reminders, messages, notifications, everything related to credit card we are handling. As part of that project, in my bank, 150 plus projects are available. So loans will be available, net banking will be available, credit card will be available, debit card will be available, online transaction will be available, IMPS will be available, like that. N number of transactions are available. That is a product-based company. 150 products are available. I am part of one product development. In my product, 150 plus microservices are available. I am working for credit card project, credit card system. In that credit card system, I am having 150 plus microservices. Nothing but from last 3 years, we developed 150 REST APIs. Every REST API is responsible for one functionality. Now, out of these 150 REST APIs, if one REST API is not working, remaining REST APIs are going to work. All the REST APIs will run in one server? No. Every REST API is a separate project. They will run in the separate server. Now, I am going to change some code in one REST API. Then, do I need to deploy all 150 REST APIs? Only one REST API I have to deploy. So there are several advantages available with the microservices architecture. Microservices architecture nothing but backend REST APIs will be available, front-end user interface will be available. UI is one application, backend multiple applications will be available. They are called as REST API. From UI, request will come to the backend REST API. It will perform the operation and it will give the response back to the UI. Now there are several advantages available with microservices. At the same time, there are some disadvantages also with the microservices architecture. First, you got the clarity. What is a monolith architecture and what is microservices architecture? Yes. Anybody having any questions? Monolith means one application which contains everything. Microservices nothing but it is a design pattern. Now, microservice based project means collection of REST APIs. Microservices project means it contains collection of REST APIs. Every REST API is responsible for one functionality. Every REST API is responsible for one functionality. Every REST API is responsible for one functionality. They are independently executable, independently deployable, independently testable. Every REST API that we are creating in the microservice architecture, independently I can deploy that. Independently I can test that. Independently I can deliver that. Like this. Every REST API is responsible for one functionality. Microservices project means it contains collection of REST APIs. Now let us see advantages with the microservices. What are the advantages with microservices? Can you guys tell me? What are the advantages with microservices? Come on. The first one is easy maintenance. The application maintenance will become very easy. Okay. And we will have high availability, fast development, quick releases, will be available. Next one, technology independence. Right. Advantages with microservices. The first advantage is easy maintenance. Second advantage, high availability. Third advantage, fast development. Fourth one, quick releases. Fifth one, technology independence. Tell me, what is the meaning of easy maintenance? What is the meaning of easy maintenance? Come on, guys. When we make a code change in one microservice, only that microservice we can test, only that microservice we can package, only that microservice we can deploy. So 100 microservices available, but I have done the changes in one microservice. I will bother about only that microservice, not the remaining microservices. So that's why we are saying maintenance will be easy when you go for microservices architecture. Then what is the second one? High availability will be available. What is the meaning of high availability? Come on. Suppose this microservice is down. Any problem? No. Application will never go down. If one microservice having a problem, the remaining functionalities are going to work. So high availability will be there when you go for microservices architecture. What is this? Fast development. What is the meaning of fast development? We are going to develop one REST API, test it, deploy that, deliver that. So development will be faster when you go for microservices architecture. If it is a monolith, we need to develop everything, then only we can test it and we can deliver that. But here, one small API we are going to develop, test and deploy. Deployments will be faster. That is called quick releases. And the technology independence. What is the meaning of that? This can be developed by using Java. This can be developed by using Python. This can be developed by using .NET. Got it? So here, every REST API is a separate project. So we can develop them by using different technologies. Technology independence will be available. Now let's understand drawbacks with microservices. Challenges or drawbacks with microservices. The first drawback with microservices, that is bounded context. The first drawback with microservices, that is bounded context. And second problem, lot of configurations. And the third problem, visibility. And the third problem is visibility. So these are the drawbacks with microservices, or we can say challenges with microservices. Instead of drawbacks, I can say challenges. Challenges with microservices. First, let us see what is microservice. Microservice is an architectural design pattern to develop applications with the loosely coupling. Microservice is a design pattern that is used to develop our application with loosely coupling. Microservices project means it contains collection of REST APIs. Every REST API is responsible for one functionality. Advantages with microservices. What is the first advantage? Easy maintenance. Second advantage, high availability. Third one, fast development. Fourth one, quick releases. Fifth one, technology independence. Now coming to challenges with microservices. I mean to say, what are the drawbacks with the microservices? Omshi, sign what are them? What are the challenges with the microservices? What is the first one? What is the first one? That is bounded context. What is the second one? Lot of configurations. What is the third one? Visibility. Now let's understand what are these problems. First one, bounded context means deciding number of microservices required in one project. Client has given one requirement to develop e-commerce application like a Flipkart, Amazon. Client wants to start one e-commerce business. He told that just like Flipkart, I want one project. I am from Hong Kong. In the Hong Kong, I want to do e-commerce business. I want one project for that. It is very difficult. It is very difficult in the initial stage for the developers to decide how many microservices we need to create in one project. Do I need to go for 30 microservices? Do I need to go for 50 microservices? Do I need to go for 100 microservices? Deciding the number of microservices to be developed for the project, that is one of the biggest challenge. That is called bounded context. You have seen cricket match. Boundary will be available. If that line cross with step 4, without step 6, they have decided a boundary in the ground. Similarly, what is the boundary for our project? What is the boundary line for our project? Client has given 100 requirements for the e-commerce business. For 100 requirements, do I need to create 100 microservices? Can I accommodate 100 requirements in the 80 microservices? How many REST APIs, how many microservices we need to create in our project? That is the one of challenging task in that project. That is called as bounded context. Are you guys clear? Tell me, what is the bounded context? Deciding the number of microservices, or I can say REST APIs required for our project. deciding the number of microservices required for our project. That is complex task. That is called bounded context. Now, next one. In this microservice, I want to communicate with the database configuration. In this microservice, actuators configuration. In this microservice, Kafka configuration. In this microservice, SMTP configuration. Same thing I want to do in this microservice, this microservice, this microservice. How many places we need to do the configuration? Duplicated configurations will be available. In every microservice, I need to configure data source properties, SMTP properties, actuator properties, Kafka properties, Redis properties, security configuration I have to do in the every microservice. That is another problem when we go for microservices architecture, which is called as lot of configuration. So lot of configuration in every microservice. In every microservice, we have to configure, we have to write some common configurations. Example. What is the example for common configuration in every microservice? Data source, SMTP, Kafka, Redis, security, etc. Right? So like this, I need to write all these configurations in almost all the microservices. We are having 150 microservices. Every microservice having database logic. Data source properties I have to write in every microservice. SMTP properties I have to write. Kafka properties I have to write. Redis properties I have to write. Configurations will become heavy. Configurations will become duplicate when you go for microservice, because everything is a separate project. Everything will run in the separate server. So common configurations we have to write in the microservices architecture. And the third one, that is visibility. If you are working in the microservices architecture project, you will not get complete clarity on the project. Are you guys getting my point? So if you are working on the microservices architecture project, you will not get complete clarity on the project. Why? Because when you go for microservices architecture, you may get the chance to work with only 10 to 15 microservices in the year. You will get the chance to work with 10 to 15 microservices in the year. From last 3 years, I am working on the project. I got the chance to work with around 45 to 50 microservices in the 3 years. I know about only those 50 microservices. What about the remaining 100 microservices? I don't know. I don't know. I am belongs to the same project, but in my project, 150 APIs are available. I did not get the chance to work with 150 APIs. I got the chance to work with 40 to 50 APIs only from 3 years. In those APIs, some APIs I already forgot. 3 years back, I developed a few APIs. In the first year, I developed a few APIs. Second year, I developed a few APIs. This is my third year in the project. I'm developing few APIs. Maximum last 1 year APIs, I remember. What is the functionality of that API? What about the first year APIs, which I developed? If I see that code, I will also not understand. Are you getting my point? So do I have complete visibility on the project? No. So it is microservices based project, not only in my company, not only in my project. Any company, any team, if you are working on microservices, you will not have complete clarity on the project. Because of security reasons, company also will not tell you everything about their business. Company also will not tell you everything about their business. Why? Now I am working for one company. Tomorrow if I go for other company, if I go for same kind of business company, whatever the functionality I know, their business secrets I will tell to other company. Right? Their business secrets I will tell to other company. So that's why companies will maintain abstraction. In the core Java, you studied abstraction. What is abstraction? Whatever is required for you, they will give you only that. So now you got the requirement. They will tell about only one REST API. In my bank now, especially in the banking sector, whenever a new requirement come, they will tell about only that requirement. Hey, team, we got one requirement. Within one sprint, you have to complete this requirement. They will not tell us where they are going to use that API. They will not tell from where the request come to that API, to whom I need to give the response also, they will not tell. They will tell that this is how you will get the JSON. This is how I want the JSON. This is your request structure. This is your response structure. This is the logic. Develop the API, deliver that. Don't ask me from where the request is coming to where the response is going. That is the abstraction. In the banking sector, you know that we are not going to get FDD also. Document also will not be available. Whatever the requirement is there, they will explain in the meeting. That's it. We need to maintain a note in our notebook, what they are telling. That's it. That's it. We need to remember what they are telling in the meeting and we need to develop that. Every day meeting will be available, but a document will not be available because of security, because of the abstraction. So company will not reveal their business to the development team or to the testing team. So that is one of the problem when you go for microservices architecture. If it is a monolith architecture, complete application will be available, complete code will be available. You can see each and everything in the application. You can debug the entire project execution. But in the microservices, you develop the API, you use a postman, you give the request, you get the response, test it, deploy that. That's it. The integration will not happen in our location. Integration will happen in the different location. The people who are integrating, they don't know where the development is happening. Are you guys getting my point? I don't know where my APIs will integrate. In my banking application, I'm developing APIs, but I don't know where is the UI for my project. I have never seen the UI in the last 3 years. I have never seen the UI in the last 3 years for my project because security. Because of security. You need to develop API, you take the request, you give the response. That's it. From where the request will come to my API, we don't know. They will not tell that. They will not tell that. My UI team is available. For the UI, where the backend API is developing, they don't know. And where my integration is happening, we don't know. It is completely abstraction. Especially, this will be there mainly in the banking applications and in the insurance application. Unfortunately, from last 6 years, I am working on these 2 domains only. One is insurance in my Deloitte company, and in my current company, this is a banking project. So these things will have high security, high confidential, and a highly abstraction will be available. Are you guys getting my point? Right. So what are the problems with microservices? Come on. What is the first problem? The first problem, that is bounded context. What is the meaning of bounded context? What is the meaning of bounded context? For the given requirement, how many APIs we need to develop? How many REST APIs we need to develop? In one REST API, how many functionalities we need to develop? Deciding that is very, very, very challenging. For 3 to 4 years experienced people, that chance will not be available to decide. Project architect, project tech leads are going to decide for which functionality, which API we need to create. For 3 to 4 years people, that chance will not be available. High level management will decide that how many REST APIs we need to create. For that also, they will conduct several meetings to come up with the project architecture. So what we need to develop, how many APIs we need to develop. In one API, which functionality we need to develop. So 2 functionalities can we develop in a single API? Is it possible or not? They will do a lot of brainstorming and they will decide that count. So deciding that count is very difficult. That's why I'm saying that bounded context is one of the challenge with the microservices. And what is the second challenge? Lot of configuration. What is the meaning of lot of configuration? Right. Some common configurations we need to write in every project. Next one, visibility. Team members will not get whole project knowledge. Team members will not get chance to work with every module in the project, right? Visibility will be very less when you go for microservice architecture. The requirement is there. When you are going to develop a requirement, they will tell about only that REST API requirement. You develop that REST API, you deliver that. Once it is completed, then they will give you the requirement for another REST API. There is no relation between this REST API and this REST API. That means every day new functionality, every day new requirement will be available for you. From where the request is coming to where the response is going, we don't know. So that will be the abstraction they will maintain in the companies. Especially insurance domain, banking domain will have that kind of abstraction. Good. So with this we understood what is monolith architecture and what is our microservices architecture. Microservices advantages: easy maintenance, high availability, fast development, quick releases, and technology independence. Challenges: bounded context will be there and lot of configurations will be available, and visibility will be one of the problem in the microservices. Okay, now let's talk about microservices architecture. Let's talk about microservices architecture. Guys, here we need to be smart. For microservices, there is no fixed architecture. For the Spring MVC, there is a fixed architecture: dispatcher servlet, handler mapper, controller, view resolver, view component. Like that, there is a fixed architecture for Spring MVC. But when it comes to microservices, there is no fixed architecture. According to project requirement, according to company requirement, people are customizing microservices architecture. Now, if you see here, API is available, user interface available, DB is available. This is called as microservices architecture. Along with this, some additional components also we can add in the microservices architecture. For microservices, there is no fixed architecture, but I will tell you the most frequently used architecture in most of the projects. So let me take here one service which is called as service registry. One is called as service registry. Service registry is available. Okay. Then next one, let me take up some APIs. API 1. Okay. API 1 nothing but one REST API. And let me take API 2, another REST API. API 1 available, API 2 is available. We can consider them as two REST APIs in our project. Like this, 100 REST APIs also can be available. Now, this box will represent all the APIs in our project. This box will represent all the APIs in our project. Now, for these things, I will be having one admin server and I will be having one Chipkin server. Admin server will be available and Chipkin server will be available. What is the purpose of admin server, Chipkin server? We will understand slowly. First, let me give the overview how microservices based projects looks like in the industry. Okay. Our APIs, whatever the API 1, API 2, we are going to develop. These APIs will register with the service registry. Our APIs are going to register with the service registry. Our APIs will register with admin server. Our APIs will register with admin server. Our APIs will register with the Jipkin server. Our APIs will register with the service registry. Our APIs will register with admin server. Our APIs will register with the Jipkin server. And depends upon the requirement, our APIs will communicate with Redis. Our APIs will communicate with the Redis. Our APIs will communicate with the Kafka. And our APIs will communicate with the config server. Our APIs will communicate with config server also. Redis, Kafka, and config server will be available. And sometimes our APIs will communicate with third-party APIs also. Our project can communicate with some third-party APIs. Okay, third party. What is the meaning of third party? Developed by some other company. Developed by some other company. Those are called as third-party APIs. Our APIs will communicate with third-party APIs also. Depends on the requirement. One API can communicate with another API. That is called inter-service communication. And my APIs can communicate with database also. And my APIs can communicate with Redis cache. My APIs will communicate with the Kafka. My APIs will communicate with config server. And to manage all these APIs, we will be having API gateway. To manage all the APIs in our project, API gateway is available. API gateway is called as entry point for all the APIs in our application. Any request which is coming to our application, that request will go to API gateway. API gateway will go to service registry. Service registry will maintain all the APIs which are available in our application. Are you guys clear? Look at this. We are having API gateway. We are having service registry, admin server, Jipkin server, backend REST APIs available. Here I have given API 1 and API 2. It can be 20, it can be 30, it can be 100, depends on the requirement. And my APIs will communicate with Redis server. My APIs will communicate with the Kafka. My APIs will communicate with config server. My APIs can communicate with the database. My APIs can communicate with the third-party APIs also. What is the meaning of third-party APIs? The APIs which are developed by other company. And my API 1 can communicate with API 2. That is called inter-service communication. Inter-service communication, external service communication also will be available. Finally, UI will be available here. Whatever the request that is coming from the UI, that will go to API gateway. API gateway will verify that request, will execute some logic to verify that request is valid request or not. Then API gateway will give that request to service registry. Service registry will give it to actual APIs which are available in our project. So look at this. If you can develop a project like this, that means you are microservices developer. Look at that. This API. Guys, in every project, same architecture will not be available. In some projects, API gateway may not be available. In some projects, Kafka may not be available. In some projects, Redis may not be available. So it depends upon project, depends upon the requirement. This architecture they will customize according to their requirement. But this is the generalized architecture of the microservices application. Online people able to follow this? That is normal concept, not related to microservices. Guys, just read the names. We don't know what is the purpose of Jipkin server. We don't know what is the purpose of config server. I have just given the architecture diagram. That's it. Just to keep this diagram in your brain. Tomorrow we will do postmortem on the diagram. Tomorrow we will understand what is the purpose of each component available in this diagram. Just read the names. Remember the names. That's it. UI, API gateway, service registry, admin server, Jipkin server, Redis, Kafka, config server, API 1, API 2, third party API. API 1 to API 2, that is called inter-service communication. My APIs can communicate with the DB and my APIs can communicate with the third party APIs also. Depends on the requirement. Multiple APIs can connect with a single database, or every API can have its own database. That is again depends on the requirement. Clear? Good. Guys, tomorrow we will understand more about this architecture. Today, you just need to remember what is monolith architecture, what are the challenges, drawbacks, and what is microservices architecture, what are the advantages with microservices, and what are the disadvantages with microservices, and what is microservices architecture. Just diagram, that's it. Microservices architecture. Perfect. I will share this diagram with you people. We'll continue tomorrow, guys. We'll see you tomorrow morning in the JRTP class. All of you completed code review. SonarQube is not installing. I will check it. Okay. Fine, guys. Thank you. We'll see you in the tomorrow's class.